Very good day to you and welcome to the Game Changer program, proudly brought to you by the National Transitional Justice Working Group of Zimbabwe. Roberto Cabrera, who's a Guatemalan human rights activist, says, when considering the question, should we remember, it is very important to firstly ask, has any victim been forgotten? Should they ever forget? Secondly, we should ask, who wants to forget? Who benefits when all the atrocities stay silent in the past? The year 2023 marks 40 years since the inception of the Gukurahundi massacres in Matabeleland and the Midlands region. In January 1983, the Korean 5th Brigade was deployed in Matabeleland and Midlands provinces and marked a beginning of a terrible nightmare. Negative impacts obviously still have a ripple effect until this day and age. And of course, the Gukurahundi in Chishona means early rains that cleanse the chaff. They have had serious impacts, and we know that they have instilled generational traumas. And today, in remembrance of this tragedy which befell the nation in 1983, the National Transitional Justice Working Group of Zimbabwe is commemorating the Gukurahundi to promote peace, memory, healing, and reconciliation. To join me for this conversation, I have with me Dr. Solomon Mungure, a transitional justice expert, and along the way, I'll be conversing with other experts who are part of this conversation to help us find solutions to how we can truly find solutions to these serious traumas and the challenges that we faced in the past. Welcome, Doctor. How are you today?
I'm very good, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. It's obviously a very sad conversation we're about to have, and I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on the Game Changer, as of course you're a Game Changer of the day. Let's talk a little bit about commemorating Gukurahundi from a transitional justice perspective. Why is it so significant?
So, Unique, this is not an easy theme, and I want to appreciate that the National Transitional Justice Working Group has facilitated this type of interaction and discourse. But let me just start by highlighting to you that we need not just to celebrate the past because of its good things. We also need to celebrate the past for its bad things, because that's part of the healing itself. That's part of recovering from that past and also dealing with the legacies that we have partly perhaps aired, or legacies that might arise from commissions or omissions of the past. I want you to understand that, and the rest of the audience to understand that this is one way of revitalizing our nation building project.
Right.
It would never be easy to establish a nation without acknowledging some of the gray areas of that past.
Right.
And that's pretty much what the National Transitional Justice Working Group is doing. But not only the National Transitional Justice Working Group, there are several other players that are in the mix and that have contributed to this past. Some have written, some of them are part of the government structure, and the government itself has taken a commitment to deal with the past by setting up agencies and institutions that are dealing with this. But I want to go further than that to say that this also allows us to displace the sense that people are not sensitive to the interests of those people who affected, the victims in their communities. So that sense of impunity is partly displaced when we take a proactive stance to addressing our past. But the other thing that is very important is that it reinvigorates the language that government has already been using and that government properly uses in terms of no place and no people left behind. That logic narrative sits well with the National Transitional Justice efforts to ensure that we deal with the past. But let me just go on a little bit more so that you pick some of the interesting stories here. So the idea of transitional justice implies a proactive engagement with our past. It's not a forced engagement with our past. It's a proactive indulgence with our past in a way that allows us to own that negative history or a positive history for that matter. So we own everything together as a nation. And that's the idea. If it is forced on us, then it ceases to be transitional justice, because there's no transition when you don't accept that part of the history. So in essence, the National Transitional Justice Working Group has established thematic areas to deal with that past. Some part of it is knowledge management, where we need to say this truth out, and not saying it out of any force, saying it with commitment to ensure that our sons, our daughters, our progeny will inherit the narrative, and understand that at some point in our history as a nation, we came to the resolution that this past is to be addressed inclusively, with everyone participating, so that we chart a way forward in a better way. There's a section of it that is called memorialization, where we live the memory of those events. And when we live the memory of those events, we should be cautious about people capturing the past for purpose of political and whatever expedience, but ensuring that all Zimbabweans, East, West, and North and South, understand that this is a page of our history that we went through. And it doesn't have to be something that is like, oh, this is a history of this particular people, this ethnic group, this political movement, and whatever. We should own that collectively and together. And I think from my end, I also want to make it a point that we want to make this a national issue. And it's not me who is making it. It's not you or Unique who is making it. It's a national issue because part of our citizens page. And I want to conclude by just saying, for us, at any point in our history, we should understand that one person lost who is Zimbabwean, whether it's in country or outside the country, is one too many.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mungure, for that. And obviously, what I got from you talking about the significance of transitional justice is we need to acknowledge the past, because it's very important for us to move forward. And you talked about, the younger generations being able to accept that this is something that happened. But, as a country, we are actually trying to rectify the challenges that we faced. 40 years on, Doctor, we want to look at some of the measures that have been put in place to deal with the effects of Gukurahundi by the government of Zimbabwe. I know that you obviously highly commend the government because they've already started those conversations. But what other measures have been put in place to make sure that we're addressing these issues?
So let me say it loudly so that we understand the reason why we need to do this. There are things in our past that we should put an exclamation and a never again behind. And the idea of doing that is that, and this is not part of a national project, this is what we should do even at home. For anything that is happened wrongly within the family, we should put an exclamation to end it. And the reason why we want to say never again here is to show our kids that we can still live together regardless of that patch of the history that we've lived. And that's basically the logic. Because development, in a sense, Unique, can only take place when a nation is united. And that unity is very costly to establish unless people pour on the goods and the bads of that past, and even the present and the future, because in the sense of TJ here, it's not just living the past, it's taking that past and taking it together as we move towards the future. But let me just respond to your question now with respect to what measures. So there are political measures that have happened, and I don't think they've really gotten to the roots of the communities. And I don't mean to diminish the efforts that have been implemented. I'm simply saying, if we did the Unity Accord in 1987, how come the remnants and memory of that past have not been washed off? It therefore means, for me, that the connection of the processes that we've instituted with the communities has got a gap. And that gap is essentially what the other activities that I will narrate right now have been instituted to address. And that gap arises from the fact that, well, if politicians decide that, well, we want to sign an accord to agree on cessation of hostilities, but the community don't feel included, And that's part of our democratization process, by the way, Unique. It's not a question of just doing it. It's a question of making sure that people buy into the agenda and understand the relevance of this national measure versus their day-to-day, what people prefer to say quotidian life, the sort of day-to-day life. I want to push to you that the unit accord was a good measure.
Yeah.
But because it stopped the bleeding from our nation. But at the next line of activities were not as hard and enforced as we would have wanted. Let me just highlight what then happened. So in realization of that past, in the GNU era, we established the organ for national healing, reconciliation, and integration. I think former Deputy President John Gomo was a very good advocate of that initiative. And his logic was that peace begins with you, peace begins with me, peace begins with everyone else. And that does not have to be just a mantra. It has to be operationalized on the ground. And that's exactly the call that we are having now. And beyond that, during that period, a government instituted one branch of that the GNU, which was called the JOMIC.
Right.
The Joint Monitoring and Implementation Committee, which was the foot soldier of making sure that people don't always think that any activity that we do is to be antagonistic. And therefore, we try to mend the relations between communities. It did not so much go back to address the Gukurahundi stories. So that was a gap too. So I'm just highlighting that we instituted this, but it had this weakness. It instituted this and this weakness. As a 2013, with our new constitution, we then established among the Chapter 12 commissions, one of the commissions was the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. The commission has 10 functions, which I can't recite, but one of them is to deal with that past. And I want to highlight that the commission has done its efforts, but not to the satisfaction of the general public. And I think that's why it's still there. It still is a term that is going to finish and the activity that is going to go through. So those are the things that we are talking about. But let's also think about post-GNU, therefore, what has happened. So we have the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, like I said, but also understand that the president has taken the prerogative to sit behind to ensure that the reburials and memorializing of Gukurahundi activities are done in Matebeleland with the blessings of the chiefs. So the front person for these activities has been the chief.
Okay.
And partly the reason why I feel that's a legitimate and a good measure too is also that the person has got some degree of inclusivity in terms of the community behavior. If we engage a political player there, things will change. And I'm not saying the other players should not come in. The church should come in, the political actors should come in, but the chiefs should deal with the issue of burials specifically.
Being the gatekeepers.
Being the gatekeepers, because they are the ones who are the custodians of those communities. They are the ones who know the burial shrines. They are the ones who know how to bury and how to cleanse their communities. One of the things that I didn't say, Unique, is that we take this one so academically, so we talk about human rights and whatever. The other thing which is very critical and central to dealing with these issues is the idea that our ancestors are not happy. And this is simple logic. It doesn't have to be pronounced at a national event or anything. Simple logic says that as long as we spill blood in our own territory, we need a process of ensuring that we cleanse it. And cleansing it is not cleaning with water. The laundry is not just water and detergents. It means going back to the steps that will ensure that everything that we've aired, we are now starting a way that is much better than that we committed. And then through that way, we appease our spirits, we appease our ancestors, we appease our land, and everything else can go on from there. There's an assignment that the president has taken on board by himself, which is development justice, or what people prefer to call redistributive justice. And it could be our dams in Matebeleland, our Zambezi water project, our third roads, and whatever. Partly people do not just want you to say we are sorry. People also want to see what is it on the ground that resonates with the apologies and the what you call the stance that the government is taking. And that's essentially what is happening there. And there's acknowledgement by most people that things have changed with the new dispensation.
Okay. So, I know you touched a little bit on this, but, and you've been, taking us through the steps of what
Yes.
measures have been put in place.
Yes.
But let's also look at some of the challenges with these measures, which some of them you've already touched on.
Yes.
In terms of the NPRC and you know and yes, and the other actors as well. What are some of the missing measures that should take place in order for there to be, you know, proper or seamless transitional justice?
So let me say it from I've interacted with the communities on the eastern side of Zimbabwe and the western side of Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll start with gaps that have nothing to do with politicians.
Right.
So one of my main pleas is that Unique, who is Shona, and Solomon, who is Shona, should have take holidays in Gai,
okay,
or in Cholocho. Because we want politicians to do things that we as communities are not doing.
Okay.
And we can partly address some of that gap between us.
Mm-hmm.
So the understanding by many communities that the Gukurahundi thing was a Shona and Debele thing, others think it was a political party thing. But our communities don't understand that because we have not been very close to each other. Other than marrying across tribes and talking about these things at school, we need to talk about them at a more frequently so that we undo the stereotypes attached with the Gukurahundi story.
Yeah.
So in my view, that's the starting point. The next point, Unique, is capacity issues. As much as we want to have these things hurriedly done, there are also things to do with resources. There are also things to do with competence. There are also things to do with language. There are also things to do with the way, the narrative that we package when we deal with these issues.
Yeah.
Else we reignite the memories and traumas of that past. And I think you've heard a lot of stories around post-traumatic stress disorder that arises from experience of that past. We need to manage it well. And we have had institutions, some civil society organizations that have had serious training in dealing with the excavation of these remains, ensuring that we still carry the moral and the spiritual connection with the past in the respect of burying those people afresh.
Right.
We also have to understand, Unique, that part of our stories in terms of the weaknesses that we've had, and I'm not pointing to government, I'm pointing to all of us, is the fact that it's not difficult for us to go and reconstruct and rehabilitate the infrastructure that was destroyed during that period. It's not difficult to ensure that children born out of the victims have their IDs.
Yeah.
It's not difficult for us to ensure that nurses and schools still have got staffing that comes from the region for them to understand that they also own the economy. Those are pretty much very simple type of measures. And when I say simple, I'm saying it from a layman's side because I'm not a resource person, I'm not a government person. But I'm just highlighting that should we have a deliberate effort towards those things, we will basically achieve whatever we want. There's also a feeling, and I'm not saying this feeling is the best feeling or not, but there's also a feeling that people just want to hear a statement of apology. And it's slightly tricky to deal with apology because you don't know which apology from who exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some of the contentions come from. Is I see it, Unique. My main call is that if we commit the willpower at the very local level up to the national level to ensure that we embrace each other and approach this issue as if it was for all of us, make it national, we'll basically deal with this issue. Let me also talk about legitimacy issues. So I'm talking of legitimacy here is to say if someone does it, does all the issues that are required around Gukurahundi, and he has no national or state representation, that thing may easily be disowned because it has no legacy, it has no footprint. We have no trace of why it was done and who did it, and was it seen in the public that it was happening.
Yeah.
So there's needs somehow to ensure that government pushes it itself. And therefore, the rest of the people will look at it and see that, well, our state was so responsible. This is what we did. Let me just say the other things. There's also a tendency, and these are the weaknesses that you're talking about, the shortcomings. There's also a tendency for people just to capture the narrative. there's a lot of political capital when people criticize the way in which this process was prosecuted and whatever. But at this point, many people think that a way forward will be profiling a way forward is a much better way to deal with that past than locking ourselves in blame games. And I don't mean to say that there was no blame. There's serious blame.
Yeah.
But we want that blame to be co-owned, because one way or the other, we were either one side of the pendulum or the other side of the pendulum. So we both, or all of us, then we need serious resourcing. If we decide that the chiefs are the ones who are going to do the burials, do they have the cars to move around? Do they have the capacity and support? And that support can come from the NPRC or any other commissions to ensure that technically they are doing it in the proper procedures. Although we know that the chiefs has got their own technicalities in terms of the spiritual connections with the custodians of the land. So that resourcing is necessary. And even resourcing the NPRC itself. Because once we do reburials and we don't know how many graves are going to be exhumed, how many people are going to be exhumed, where are they going to be buried, where are we going to move the remains to, that may mean a lot of resources in terms of what we need to have. And whether it happens from the office of the president itself or from the NPRC, that's still a good way to go in terms of what we want to see, because the ultimate thing is that we want to see these people putting an end to a story that they've defined. And I think that for me will be a good way in terms of dealing with these issues. And I think these are, I've just highlighted some of the weaknesses and shortcomings that we've had.
All right. Dr. Mungure, just before we go on a short break.
Yes, please.
Let's lastly talk about reconciliation for the victims and the families of the Gukurahundi.
Yes.
Because obviously there's the bigger picture where we have, chiefs becoming gatekeepers, we have the NPRC playing its key role.
Yes.
And as you rightfully said, we have generational traumas.
Correct.
Where even until now, and I'm sure, I don't know if you saw the picture, I think it was posted last year, where we had Lobengula, I think, standing next to Mbuyani in Bulawayo. And someone came to paint over that because they actually say that we will not forget. And these are not the older generation, these are young people. And now I cannot, for example, get married, for example, to Ndebele because the father says there is no Shona that's going to step into my house.
Correct.
So how do we deal with the issues of healing and reconciliation within families and looking at victims? Because even until now, you're saying we have some families that still can't get IDs due to the fact that there is a Gukurahundi that happened.
Sure. So let me walk that pace slightly slowly. So reconciling is an expensive process. And let's not take it as if, we can just give an apology and then we handshake and then we wash down everything. We should understand that there is some captured, I don't want to say graffiti or something. There is memory, digital memory of almost everything that happened. And it's not easy to erase. The easiest way to erase, which we generally as humans don't accept, is to accept that, well, we did this under these circumstances, whatever, and go along with it. So the reconciliation bit is slightly harder. The healing side is equally hard. Because now, for as long as someone feels that the torment that I suffered and that I'm still suffering is not receiving the requisite, response by people who might have done it, then someone feels very much locked. And sometimes they don't even participate. Sometimes they withdraw. Sometimes they even pretend to participate when they're actually not happy with the participation. So part of that process might require a lot of psychologists going in, and it's not like psychologists is in trained psychology. They may not even know how to deal with these things because these are very context-specific type of issues. But one of the things that we do is that we need to exhibit a sense of embrace to victims. So a person can simply start feeling that, well, I can open up to this person because we are together on a day-to-day basis. We talk the same language, we interact, we eat together. So as long as we open that window, healing becomes easy. But remember, the depth of a wound is not similar for everyone. So some people contributed in the killing of their own fathers and parents and relatives directly because they were forced to. Some people did it out of it was a call on duty. But even those who prosecuted the exercise are also traumatized. We should understand that the idea of healing is not meant for victims alone. It should also be packaged for the perpetrators, because as long as the perpetrator sees things in that way, they also live a traumatized life. And that trauma is what we need to understand, that not everyone is going to heal at the same pace, but we need to create a permissive environment to allow those processes to unleash. And remember, Unique, you and I are not experts in that. So people have argued that for that to happen, sometimes let's engage the communities themselves to divulge what they think is the best way for them to heal. Because sometimes this healing here is not as prescriptive as the medical healing. So that type of healing requires us to understand which acumen, which resources, which proficiencies reside at community and national level to address those issues. And then you will be impressed that by the way in which our Zimbabweans are so skilled to address some of these issues.
Well, thank you so much. That was Dr. Solomon Mungure, who's a transitional justice expert. And of course, at the end of the day, he says that the process of healing and reconciliation is not an easy one, but we need to create a permissive or a friendly environment so that these processes can actually take place. As of course, we still continue the discussions around the Gukurahundi, commemorating 40 years on Gukurahundi commemorations on the Game Changer program. After the short break, we're going to have Tandekile Moyo, who's a peace and reconciliation expert, who'll be taking us through the significance of the resolution of the Gukurahundi from a transitional justice perspective. Remember, this program was proudly brought to you by the Transitional Justice Working Group of Zimbabwe. We'll be right back.
The 4th International Renewable Energy Conference and Expo, in partnership with the Ministry of Energy and Power Development of Zimbabwe, will be held under the theme Managing the Future, Clean Energy Possibilities, from the 21st to the 24th of March 2023.
This conference is timely. Renewable energy is no longer a matter of choice, but of necessity. It is important that we remain alive to work concertedly towards the realization of SDG 7.
So save the date. The conference will take place at the Elephant Hills Hotel in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. For more information or to register, go on events at alphamedia.co.zw or renewable.amh.co.zw. Managing the future. Clean energy is possible.
Welcome back to the Game Changer program, proudly brought to you by the National Transitional Working Group of Zimbabwe. We are in the year 2023, and of course, the year 2023 marks 40 years since the inception of the Gukurahundi massacres in Matabeleland and Midlands region. And today we are commemorating this event that happened. And of course, in remembrance of the tragedy which befell the nation in 1983, the National Transitional Justice Working Group of Zimbabwe is commemorating the Gukurahundi to promote peace, memory, healing, and reconciliation. Just before the break, we had Dr. Mungure, who's a transitional justice expert, telling us a little bit about the significance of commemorating Gukurahundi from a transitional justice perspective. He does say that at the end of the day, it's important that we address the gray areas of our past in order for us to move forward. And remember, at the end of the day, these challenges also have some generational trauma that they come with, to the point where we need to create a conducive environment where we can continue these conversations. He also says that healing and reconciliation are not easy, but if we start these conversations, it will definitely make a big difference. Right now, I have with me Tandekile Moyo, who is a peace and reconciliation expert. And Tandekile will be speaking to us about the significance of the resolution of the Gukurahundi from a transitional justice perspective. Tandekile, how are you today? Thank you so much for joining us on the Game Changer program.
Thank you for having me. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Fantastic. So I know you were listening in on part of our conversation just before the break with Dr. Mungure. Let's talk about the significance of this resolution of the Gukurahundi from a transitional justice perspective. Why is this resolution so important, Tandekile?
So it's important for any society that has experienced conflict to try and find ways of moving on to peace times, because the end of a conflict does not necessarily mean that people are now going to live together peacefully. It may just mean that there is the end of active fighting, right? There's the end of killing, but still people post-conflict have feelings of being violated. They've got memories of the violence. They have got traumas that they experience. So it is very important to address those things before a society can move on to being peaceful. And it's also important for development's sake, because most societies that have no peace do not then prioritize development, because they are solving all these other resultant issues from the tensions that still exist even after a conflict. And in terms of transitional justice, you know, I think one of the major aims of transitional justice is to prevent recurrence, right? It's a way of acknowledging that what happened must never happen again, but you don't just proclaim, as the doctor before me said, you don't just say never again and stop there. You have to take active measures to make sure that such occurrences don't happen again. So what that would look like depends on the people themselves, what it would take for them to feel, okay, we have been heard. Because the other reason for resolving such issues is to make sure that victims feel that their feelings are valid. They feel that they are seen, the pain and the suffering that they went through is seen and validated. You know, so when you validate a victim that way, you are also toning down the anger in them. And that anger is what could cause recurrence, right? So you are going through a process of making sure that the people that were violated feel seen, feel that what was done to them is acknowledged as a wrong, and that the society at large is hell-bent on moving forward and addressing those things that were done to them.
I think that's really brilliant there, Tandekile. You talk about, you know, a nation sort of transitioning from being in a state of peace, but communities not necessarily being at peace because of the or challenges that would have happened before. And you also mentioned that, you know, the victims or families of, you know, these certain challenges, for example, we're talking about Gukurahundi, should be heard, and, you know, they should actually be sort of compensated for the challenges that happened. So in your view, who and what is the rightful body or institution to resolve the Gukurahundi?
So there has to be a collective effort, right? An effort that includes victims, that includes perpetrators, and that includes experts, people who know how these issues must be resolved. But then without a collective effort, the efforts would be meaningless, right? Because if any effort leaves out the feelings of victims or the ideas of victims for progress, it means that it's led by elites, and it's perpetrator centric. So whatever happens, victims are never going to accept that as an effort, right? So I believe that an independent body that is not beholden to the perpetrator, or in this case, the state rather, in any way, is the first step. We have a body that is chosen, an independent body can be chosen by both perpetrators and victims. What we have now, the NPRC, is flawed by just because the commissioners are chosen by somebody who is seen by victims as a perpetrator. So whatever that commission, no matter how good their intentions, no matter how advanced their expertise, nothing that they bring to the table will be seen by victims as sincere, because victims will think that this is a perpetrator-led effort. So what can we expect from it? So who chooses the commissioners is a very important thing in whatever body that is chosen, so that it shows that if the body is not entirely independent, at least it represents both perpetrators and victims, right? Because without that, we just have a facade of we are doing something, which is how a lot of people view the NPRC. It's important for the members of the NPRC Commission, and actually, I'm not going to call it the NPRC Commission, because I think that commission itself, even in its naming, leaves a lot to be desired, because it's a peace and reconciliation commission. But peace and reconciliation don't just come from you don't just pick peace and reconciliation from the sky. There has to be efforts made for you to achieve peace and reconciliation. So in the first place, you need a commission that acknowledges that there has to be justice, right? That there has to be truth-telling. Because if you just call it a peace and reconciliation, it's as if you're going to command people to have peace. But it's a process. Peace and reconciliation is a result of things that are done for people to achieve peace and reconciliation. So aside from who chooses the commissioners, the commission itself will have to make it clear that it is an effort to achieve peace by seeking justice for victims. It's not just trying to achieve peace by talking, but it has to be a justice effort. And so the justice aspect is what scares a lot of perpetrators, right? But justice is not just about prosecutions. You might find that the victims themselves are not out there thinking, let's arrest the perpetrators. They have their own idea and their own perspectives about justice, which the perpetrator should be willing to hear, right? Because the effort here, the point of any effort is not to arrest anyone, but the point is for the society to transition to a peaceful state, for the society to have people that feel secure, that if anybody comes and kills me, at least the state will protect me, because that is what we don't have at the moment because of the conflict. We have a people that believes that the government of Zimbabwe does not care about them. The government of Zimbabwe hates them. The government of Zimbabwe marginalizes them, right? So as we do our peace building, we must be cognizant of that. And it has to be clear to the victims that this commission is not just coming here to pay lip service to peace and reconciliation.
Quite interestingly, Thandekile, you mention, and this is something you emphasize, that, at the end of the day, if the NPRC is being chosen by the so-called perpetrators, and, the victims and the families believe that obviously the NPRC is not being chosen independently, then who should be choosing at the end of the day? I mean, just before, Dr. Mungure was saying that, some victims or families can even believe that, the Mashonaland is more dominant when we're looking at even the NPRC. So how can, people from the Mashonaland region have a say in the Matabeleland or Midlands region? How do we fix these challenges? Should we not be going back to those regions and finding experts within those regions to actually have these conversations with these people? Because possibly they could, understand or empathize with them more.
So you see, the thing about such a commission, we have to be careful for victims not to feel that the commission is just a facade, but we also have to be careful not to let perpetrators feel that it's a vengeance, like it's a commission hell bent on getting them, right? So we have to strike that balance where perpetrators know that this is going to be a fair and just process, and where victims know the same. So the commission can't just be victims only or people from the victim side. But how it
Right.
is now, like the doc was explaining, is flawed as well, because it can't be majority people from Mashonaland. But besides that, it goes deeper than that. The people in the commission, a lot of them have Zanu Pf ties. In the last commission, we had the son of a Zanu Pf minister in the commission. Already, that shows there's a conflict of interest because Zanu is the perpetrator, right? Because the government at the time was, the ruling party was Zanu Pf. So it's the people of Zanu Pf who are regarded as perpetrators. So the commission, it has to seem fair. The people on the commission may say to themselves, hello, I'm the son of a minister, but I've got a PhD in this, I'm an expert in that. But does it seem fair to an outsider, to a victim? Does a victim feel safe even speaking to that commissioner and telling them, this is what was done to me, right? So the commission should be chosen by both perpetrators and victims. It has to be a collaborative effort. If that is not possible, let the commission be chosen by outsiders. We've got the African Union, we've got SADC, we've got the UN, we've got regional and international bodies that have experience in dealing with these things. So if we feel that as a country we have failed to choose our own commissioners that seem fair and reasonable, then let's call people to help us. They're experts in this, they're mediators, they're expert negotiators, they're people that can help us set up a commission that is independent, a commission that is fair and seems fair to both the victims and the perpetrator. Because what we're looking for when we are creating such a commission, we are not looking to punish excessively or arbitrarily the people that perpetrated this. We're also not looking to silence victims. Transitional justice is futuristic, right? It's a process that says, what do we want our future to look like? It's people coming together and saying, we did this in the past. What are we willing to do to prevent it from happening again? So we have to be really futuristic in our looking at it, and the people on the commission have to be people that can be neutral, people that can look at this without emotion, because both the perpetrator and the victim, they're emotional, they have their own fears. So neutrality is key in this commission. The perpetrator, the government cannot be choosing. So the NPRC can't be the one to deal with Gukurahundi. They can deal with other things that can help peace and reconciliation to be achieved in the country. But for Gukurahundi in particular, because the perpetrator was the government of the time, there has to be a neutral person choosing the commissioners, or both the perpetrator and victim coming up with the commission.
Thanks so much, Thandikilo. As a peace and reconciliation expert, what are some of your recommendations on how the Gukurahundi issue can be addressed to bring and deliver justice and obviously foster healing? Because obviously we still see that 40 years on, there's still a lot of gaps, there's still a lot of challenges, people still have serious trauma here. But how can we address these issues of justice and healing?
So transitional justice itself has got, I guess, 4 ways and more that can address these issues. So one of the ways of addressing these issues would be prosecutions, where people that perpetrated violence are prosecuted and people therefore feel justice was served. Another method is truth-telling, where people come together and tell the truth about what happened. This involves perpetrators coming to answer questions from victims, questions that are preventing victims from moving on. So you'll find that enforced disappearance was one of the methods that were used to violate the people of Matabeleland at the time. And we have families who till today don't know what to do, because they don't know if their loved ones were abducted and are rotting away in some prison, or they were killed, right? So what truth-telling does, it provides closure for victims. Somebody can tell them, no, we are so sorry, your father was killed on this day, and this is where they are buried, right? Because victims know exactly when their people were taken, and victims know who came to take those people. So if ever there is a truth-telling process, people can find where their loved ones are, and they can go and get the bones of their loved ones and rebury them, right? So truth-telling paves way for closure, which is what a lot of victims need. And you'll find that perpetrators too sometimes need that closure. So reparations are another way of achieving transitional justice, where like in our situation, we can acknowledge that when Gukurahundi was happening, this was 1983 to 1987, it was soon after independence, while the rest of the country was enjoying the fruits of independence, was enjoying more schools being built to fix the tragedy of colonization, where we had very few secondary schools for Black people. In other parts of the country, all that was being fixed. While in Matabeleland, there was a state of emergency, there was a curfew, so there was really very little to no development going on at the time. So reparations are a way of acknowledging that while this was happening, there's a part of the country that was experiencing underdevelopment. So reparations could take the form of a policy that speeds up development in Matabeleland, a policy that fixes the fact that there are fewer schools in Matabeleland than in other regions, you know, so just repairing the damage that was done. The last one is institutional reforms, because remember, Gukurahundi was perpetrated by state institutions, right? We had the army going there and killing people. So it means that army needs to be reformed. If we have an army that was capable of killing unarmed civilians, which is a crime either under international law and even under our own national laws, it means that that institution must be reformed. But the army is not just an independent institution. The army is controlled by other institutions, like the state, right? The arms of the state, they control the army. So it means those arms of the state, they also need policy reforms. They need to be reformed so that they never again issue such orders. So now, when we look at these four things, each country decides what works best for them. South Africa had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They didn't have any prosecutions, but it moved them to another level. People can complain that, okay, it wasn't the best, but it was a starting point. So Zimbabweans can also decide which of these four pillars of transitional justice do we want to concentrate on.
Well, thank you so much, Thandekile. And you're definitely right. I mean, we need to start having these conversations. And of course, the way some of our institutions or some of these commissions have been built, it's not favorable to the victims and families. But at the end of the day, you're also saying that, you know, we need to start having these conversations in order for us to find a way forward. And we need to listen to these victims and families to also, you know, have these open discussions with them so that they feel heard and seen at the end of the day. Thank you so much, Thandekile, for joining us on this Game Changer program. Thandekile Moyo is a peace and reconciliation expert.
Imagine getting... My name is Zikamaibere. I am the Deputy Chairperson for the National Transitional Justice Working Group. The Gukurahundi is a very significant topic at this point in time for our country. That unfortunate event is historically epoched on our history, and we cannot wish it away, which is why it's important for us to continually commemorate Gukurahundi. By commemorating Gukurahundi, it's not the kind of commemoration which is a celebration. It's the kind of commemoration which is a national regret moment, where we look back at our country and share what we call collective shame. And why is that important for us as a country? It is important, first and foremost, for the victims and survivors of Gukurahundi to know that as a country, as a community, as a society, we will never forget. We will not allow the passage of time to drown our calls for justice, truth, healing. That is important. Secondly, it is acknowledgement. Now, many times when we speak about transitional justice and we talk about acknowledgement, people think it's only the state that has got the obligation to acknowledge. Yes, the state has got an obligation to acknowledge that using the tools of the state, the security apparatus of state that are designed to protect the people, the state deployed those apparatus at innocent civilians and killed over 20,000 people and raped over 60,000 women and the many orphans. Today we don't know where their parents are, and the many living human beings who don't know who their fathers are because of the violence and the atrocities that were committed by the state during Gukurahundi. So remembering them is an opportunity for the state to make that acknowledgement. But beyond the state, it is also a societal obligation to acknowledge collectively. We as citizens, we have to acknowledge. Even though we as individuals, as families, may not have done anything wrong, but we acknowledge that something terrible was done by our leadership using our institutions, and we need to remember so that we advance collective acknowledgement leading to collective sorrow and collective shame. And thirdly, it is about the future. So we remember the past for the sake of the future. When we look at the ugliness of violence and we share that collective sorrow and shame, it should inspire our Ubuntu, our humanity, uhunu wedu, to regret and make a commitment to say never again. Now, never again should go beyond rhetoric. It's not just about us saying it was bad, but it is about us as a community taking positive steps to put in place measures to make sure that never again shall we witness any incident, an atrocity like Gukurahundi. But how do we say never again if we don't put in place measures to hold those who were responsible accountable? How do we say never again if we do not reform and transform the institutions that were responsible for that atrocity? And for those reasons, we have to remember Gukurahundi. Gukurahundi does play a role in the violence that we continue to see today at different levels. First, failure to address and redress the atrocity called Gukurahundi creates what we call impunity. Now, impunity, we would say, is the Mungandidi attitude, which has pervaded our politics. What can you do to us? We are above the law. I've heard one spokesperson of a certain political party saying we are too big when asked to account. Now that is called impunity. Now if people kill people in broad daylight, they rape women in broad daylight, and nothing happens to them for 40 years, despite the fact that the perpetrators are known, that creates impunity. It is an encouragement for others to use the same tool of violence to achieve their political gains. This is why since Gukurahundi, our military has continued to be delinquent. You will remember in 1998, at the food riots, it was the police, part of the security system that is supposed to protect people, that was deployed to unleash violence on civilians. From the year 2000, moving up to around 2005, over 1.6 million were displaced across the country through political violence, which was mainly perpetrated using security apparatus. In 2017, the country witnessed an unprecedented event wherein the military said they have got the right to wage a military coup in order to defend the constitution. Now, fast forward January 2019, the military again, the police were causing chaos and beating up people left, right, and center. 1 August 2018, you will remember the Motlanthe Commission, how it clearly implicated the military in the August 1 shootings. Now, this is the fruit of impunity, where people commit atrocities and they are not held accountable. They begin to feel they are too big to obey the law. They are not accountable. That's what we call the Mungandidi attitude. Now, what we can do about that today is to be able to make sure that we continue to document these atrocities, that we continue to call for justice and accountability, but most importantly, to stand in solidarity with victims of past violence. It is important that as we get into the 2023 elections, we as a community, we raise our voice against violence. It is important that we remind the institutions that are responsible for our security that they have a constitutional obligation to respect the Constitution, to protect the citizens, and not to be used for political gain. It touches not only members of the police, it touches not only members of the security, but many other institutions that have historically been known to be responsible for violence. And an important institution is the institution of traditional leadership. We saw in the last few weeks one member of parliament alleging that traditional leaders belong to a certain political party. And that again is in violation of the constitutional principle of political neutrality when it comes to traditional leaders as the guardians of human dignity in our communities. So as we go into the elections this year of 2023, we continue to call upon the traditional leaders not to be partisan, not to participate in violence, in fact, to become agents of peace and guardians of human dignity. We call upon our security services to understand that they've got a constitutional obligation to protect the dignity of each and every person and not to be involved in advancing any political agenda. We call upon our police to maintain law and order in the communities as we go to the 2023 elections.
This program was proudly brought to you by the National Transitional Justice Working Group of Zimbabwe, as of course we were commemorating Gukurahundi, as 2023 marks 40 years since the inception of Gukurahundi massacres in Matabeleland and the Midlands, trying to find solutions, but also having these open dialogues to obviously promote peace, memory, healing, and reconciliation. Thank you to everyone who joined us on this platform, and we'll see you next time.